Hello and welcome to the show. This is an exciting day. We have another conversation starting in just a couple of minutes with me, Mary Grace, and Dr. Shawn Baker. I am the host of the Mary Grace Show. Shawn Baker is the host of the Shawn Baker podcast. And this is the second in a series, Healing America and Beyond. We are excited to come to you to discuss a number of issues around health and wellness. In the United States, primarily because we're based here, but also we know that what we're talking about is affecting people all around the world, especially because of the seminal work that Dr. Baker has done in educating and empowering people to adapt a low vegetable-free, high-fat ketogenic diet, now also known as the carnivore diet. Welcome back, Dr. Baker. It's great to have another chance to talk to you today.
Well, Mary, thanks for having me here. Yeah, I look forward to seeing what we get up to today. So thank you.
I think it's gonna be good. It looks like we've got a lot of people who've joined us on the YouTube. We've got people over on the Mary Grace Media Facebook, and, we're also streaming live on X and on Rumble today. We are on Mary Grace Media over on Rumble, and we are on the X app with both Mary Grace TV and Dr. Shawn Baker. So if you are listening, let us know where you're listening from. Give us a shout out. We love our overseas audience as well as our US audience. And I know that a lot of people will come back on replay as well. Please, as always, share this and get the word out because we are dedicated and committed to having conversations that empower people to take personal responsibility for your health and to give you the tools to do that. And that's why we're having this conversation. It's going to be a back and forth format. It's not necessarily just a strict interview format because we both have things that we want to contribute. And right now, Dr. Baker is busy sharing and retweeting. And so I'm going to carry the conversation for just a second. As you're coming in, I want to make sure that people know that you can get notifications before we do these shows by going to marygracemedia.com and signing up for the email list. When you do that, you will never miss a show. You will get a notification in your inbox, and then you can choose what platform you want to watch on. That way, no matter what's happening with your particular app, you have options of where to watch. That's marygracemedia.com. And also, any sponsors that we mentioned today will be accessible through that website. We also want to give a plug quickly, and we'll talk about this more later, but Dr. Baker is also the co-founder of Rivero.com, and I put the link up there for you. We'll come back to that, but I wanted to let people know that that he is very proud of this. It's a great option for people who are seeking to take charge of their health outside of the legacy medical system. So we're going to jump right into the content today, and wanted to start today by talking about some of the things that we've seen kind of front and center in the news. There seems to be a big emphasis right now on people pushing the idea that sugar is not only not an issue, but that it's beneficial for metabolic health. I'm not sure where this idea is coming from, but I know that you've addressed it on your channel, and I would love to discuss a little bit more about that from somebody that is not eating sugar and doesn't embrace that lifestyle at all.
Yeah, I think there are people, even, people that have formerly done a low carb diet and then they felt that maybe there was something lacking and then they added sugar back in and they felt better, or fruit or something along those lines.
Mhm.
And this falls in line with a philosophy of a guy named Ray Peat, who had quite a following. He recently passed away at, I think, 83 years of age or something like that, and had some interesting takes around nutrition. One of those takes was that sugar was not only essential, but definitely beneficial for us. And so there's people that will make the argument that without carbohydrate, without sugar, our body will adopt this state of stress, that it's stressful to produce glucose through gluconeogenesis and other mechanisms, and
Mhm.
that over time will be a net negative to the body, and things like maybe our thyroid hormone will have a problem, and we'll have other issues. And what the sort of the belief around that is often based upon some studies that show that in the short term, we do see an elevation in things like cortisol, which is a stress hormone. However, longer term studies seem to show that that is not an issue over time, and that in fact things like gluconeogenesis, for instance, is really not even dependent upon diet. It really has a minimal, um, it occurs regardless of diet. And in fact, there was a nice study that was done some 10, 12 years ago that looked at comparing a very high carb diet, like 70 plus percent carbohydrate, versus a very, very low carb diet of a 2% diet of carbohydrates. And they looked at the background gluconeogenic rates, and there was basically, it was almost unchanged. It had almost no impact in that. So I think those sort of concerns are actually more a problem with what more commonly happens is people just tend to undereat. They have gotten into this mindset that they need to restrict things chronically. I'm trying to lose weight, so therefore I'm going to eat less than I actually need, and then you get into trouble. And then they say, well,
Mhm.
they blame the diet's lack of carbohydrates when it's really the underconsumption of energy in general that really leads to that problem. So I think that's a misconception. Certainly, I mean, you see I posted a clip, I think yesterday, of an old video of Dr. John McDougall talking about the fact that Walter Kempner and other people used a high carb, sugar based diet to quote unquote cure diabetes. And the problem
Yeah.
was, in many cases, he actually took to whipping the patients to keep them on the diet. He would have to beat them to keep them to continuing on this very restrictive low carb, or sorry, high carb, very low fat, diet.
Yeah.
And the fact that we see very, very, very reproducibly people that drop carbs from their diet or lower carbs on the diet improve their diabetes. And a lot of people will criticize that and they'll say, well, it's not that you're curing the diabetes, you're just masking the symptoms. If I ask you to eat
Interesting.
a bunch of sugar, your glucose is going to go up. And while that's true, you know, but the reality is, like you said, if I'm going to fail an oral glucose tolerance test, which is either a 75 or 100-gram shot of pure glucose, which in nowhere in nature, in the real world, does that product even exist. And to say that I'm somehow pathologically broken because I can't tolerate 100 grams of pure sugar in one bolus is probably a little bit ludicrous. And the sort of thought that you're masking your symptoms, but the reality is what I see is people that are diabetic that have kidney disease, people are diabetic that have eye disease, retinopathy, people are
Mhm.
diabetic that have all these other conditions. It's not that their blood sugar normalizes, those conditions go away. That's not masking symptoms, that's actually reversing the disease. So the argument that you need sugar in your diet, or that sugar reverses diabetes, in general, is kind of preposterous in many ways. And I get, again,
Mhm.
you can sort of, I think what's really going on is you're masking the symptoms of, you know, insulin sensitivity by overloading sugar, and you're basically saying we're going to release more insulin, and we're going to become more responsive to sugar. But it's like an alcoholic. It's saying I can cure drunkenness by training you to drink more alcohol. You're not going to get drunk as easily, so you can tolerate a little bit more. You're going to create a tolerance to this product. It's not curing it, right? So this is sort of the backwards thing. And the other thing they talk about is that, like, fat. Oh, if you get fat in your blood, it's going to cause your insulin receptors to be less functional. And there's a little bit of truth in that, in the fact that yes, saturated fat in the blood does lead, in fact, it does lead to decreased insulin sensitivity. But the problem is the fat in the blood is not coming necessarily from what we're eating. It's coming from what our liver converts it into. And your liver will convert excess energy into saturated fat in the blood, called primarily palmitic acid. But it's not related to how much saturated fat we eat. So this is the part they leave out of that equation. So there's a lot.
Excess energy meaning sugars.
Well, you really anything. I mean, but it's
Oh,
often, I mean,
okay.
it's very easy to overconsume carbohydrates. I mean, that
Mhm.
that that is a macronutrient that's easy to
Okay.
overconsume. You could do it with excess fat. But again, what we have is this natural satiety mechanism. When you're eating whole, unprocessed, natural foods, fats in their natural form, i.e., a steak, you're just unlikely to overconsume that to the point that you develop fatty liver, de novo lipogenesis, excess body fat.
Mhm.
It's not that it's impossible, but it's much less likely.
Interesting. So there's in line with that, you you posted something recently about the Inuit and about the studies, with their blood sugar, and I think they essentially eat 0 carb, right? Very high fat, 0 carb. Um, so how does that come into play with this? And I mean, it's so counterintuitive, not counterintuitive, it's counter to what we as a Western society have been taught for so long, right? The brain needs glucose, you need sugar to think, right? Those types of things. And then you have a society that has, thrived and survived on none of that. So how do we square that?
Well, I mean, what was often said is, well, they had some sort of weird genetic adaptation and they're the only ones who could tolerate. But in reality, it's not just Inuit, it's Sami, it's Nene, it's Nilotic African tribes like the Maasai, the Dinka, the Mongolian rural folks from the Mongolian steppes. It's the South American gauchos. All of these people have existed for long periods of time without carbohydrates and primarily on meat. And so we know, for instance, that, like I said, and the Inuit were studied quite extensively, in the early part of the 20th century.
Mhm.
And, they looked at their metabolism because they thought it was curious. And what they found was they didn't have diabetes. They didn't have any evidence of diabetes. Now, they did see that their blood sugar tended to be a little bit higher than normal. And I think that is probably consistent with a carnivorous physiology in that situation. On average, and you remember, the Inuit are not big people. I mean, their males averaged about 150 pounds. They were relatively small, very thin, but very strong, very muscular.
Oh,
They lived on a carnivorous diet. They ate a fair bit of protein. They were eating somewhere between 4 and 8 pounds of meat a day. And these are small people. So they're consuming, and part of it's because they're in this cold environment. They have to be continuing to generate a lot of body heat just to stay warm, right? I mean, you need the
right,
energy to do
right.
that. And they would sometimes add fat. They would use seal oil was something they would use seal oil as an extra source of calories so they could stay warm, you know.
Okay, that makes sense.
So,
Now
but they
okay.
tended to run a little bit higher blood glucose, like a morning fasting blood glucose of 120, which today would be considered not diabetic but pre-diabetic. And the thought
Mhm.
was, well, why didn't they have any signs of diabetes? And I think that's consistent just with their diet. I think that's just because if you look at other carnivorous animals, and again, humans aren't animals, but we can look to see what their physiology does. And like a cat will run a fasting blood glucose of about 120. Cats are carnivorous, as we all know. Dolphins, same thing. They run about a blood glucose one, and they don't have diabetes. They don't have any of those complications. So, again, I don't know. I'm not defending having high blood glucose, but I'm just saying there's a lot more nuance to this stuff than we actually sort of are familiar with. We're used to the 60% carb, grain-based eating society. These are our numbers, and anything outside of those numbers is
Mhm.
quote unquote abnormal, and it may not be. It may be perfectly normal for that situation.
Right. Do you think, do you think that, when you look at people, you look at Americans, you look at Western society, even like 50 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, uh, during the time that, that I was a child, in hi elementary, middle, high school, we really didn't have obesity. We didn't have a lot of childhood sickness. Hardly, I think there was one child ever in my class who had cancer. It was that rare. Nobody had autism. We'd never heard of it. And we have all of these sicknesses now. We have children's hospitals, um, but we really didn't have high incidences of diabetes then. Do you know, in addition to sugar, I think we've had increased sugar consumption. What else is contributing to this right now? It's crazy how sick people have gotten, and we have high infant mortality rates. There's a lot of problems in America for being one of the most medically, quote, "medically advanced nations." We spend more on healthcare than anybody in the world per capita.
Yeah, I mean the prevalence of disease and the increasing prevalence of chronic disease in our kids is alarming, to say the least. It's shockingly bad. I don't want to, sugar consumption has not really gone up much in the last 30 or 40 years. It's pretty much flatlined and actually gone down slightly. However, Certainly, the processed oils have gone up dramatically. Most of the caloric intake over the last increase in calories over the last 75 years has come from these so-called, industrial oils, the seed oils. Sugar consumption compared to the 1800s is up, several 100%. It has risen, up to a critical level. And some people say once you reach that critical threshold, it's just a problem. And then these other things combine to that. The increase in the amount of ultra processed food we consume. Remember, what we consume is modified by what we can absorb. And so how we process food changes its absorption characteristics. When we turn food into powder, it's absorbed more readily. Smaller surface area makes sense. When food is unbroken and still in whole form, it tends to make it farther down our digestive tract and sometimes gets to the colon where it's fermented and most of it is wasted. So in a normal situation, our microbiome actually consumes quite a bit of our calories. Some studies suggest up to 22%. And so when it's all turned into powder, it's pretty much getting consumed more proximally in the digestive tract, so you absorb more. So some of that's got to do with that. I think some people would make the argument about vaccines being increasing, and maybe that's driven some of the chronic disease. I mean, that's
Mhm.
obviously a very controversial topic, and it's
Yeah.
not to say that all these things may not contribute to that. I think I mean, the arguments around sedentary stuff. I mean, I think so. I mean, it's hard to see kids, that play video games all the time now and spend
Yeah.
so much time on devices. Whereas when I was a kid, yeah, I mean, summertime, as soon as Saturday morning cartoons were over, you're out running around outside, and you come home when the lights come up, when the street lights come home. That's when it's time to
Yeah.
come home. So you're running around all day. So I think there's some more of that. I mean, it's interesting. You look at like stats on like with adults, and again, I mean, these are two different populations, but I mean, there's more people that exercise now than ever before. It's not like we have more gyms, we have more people engaged in that, but I think the diet is just so much worse that
Mhm.
it doesn't seem to be having much of an impact. So, um, I mean, I know RFK has said, I want to figure out why we're having chronic disease with the kids, and nothing is off the table. And I'll be interested to see because, in my mind, part of the issue for some people, for everybody who solves problems by going carnivore, the question becomes why? Why did that occur? What did I give
Right.
up? Was it just because I gave up processed foods or ultra processed foods, rather? And some people make that argument, but then I'll say, yeah, but there was somebody that was eating a clean diet free of processed foods, and yet they went carnivore and so would you have the audacity to test to see if vegetables are contributing to some people's illness? I mean, do we have are truly all things on the table, or are we going to just sort of put these vegetables on a holy grail? I know this is a side tangent, but I think it's interesting. I think if we're going to do, and I was talking to Jordan Peterson's wife, Tammy Peterson, just a little bit earlier today, and she was asking me, what do you think the number one thing that RFK can do to make America healthy again? And honestly, what I think he can do is get the conflict of interest out. The USDA, the FDA, other regulatory agencies, which are corporate captured and getting all this money,
Mhm.
that has to go out. That's the only way true science can come through. Because if we're going to figure this out, we need pure science that's unadulterated by all these vested interests. And I think that's the best thing he can do. I mean, with regard to, policies, because you could say we're going to ban high fructose corn syrup. We're going to ban
Right.
certain vaccines. We're going to ban certain dyes. I don't know that that's the right approach. I think let's take away the interests that are maybe you know corrupting the science, so we can actually learn what truly is harming us and what truly could potentially help us, and then we have a
That
chance, I
seems
think.
to make sense, and I'm glad you switched over to that topic because I wanted to talk about the food supply. I wanted to talk about how food is produced in America today versus even how it was 20 years ago. And one of the things that RFK Jr. is talking about a lot is that he's talking about um, how industrialized the food supply has become. For example, the meat packers are owned by BlackRock. The pork production, almost all of it is run by Smithfield, which is owned by the Chinese. And he describes the way that they do this is that they come in and they pretty much take over the whole industry. And so, for example, the pork farmers, they go into economic partnerships with them, and then they force them into their own system of growing the pork, slaughtering the pork, bringing it to market, and so essentially, it's one company that, that is contracting out to all of these farmers, and that takes the autonomy away from the small farmer who used to raise his or her own pigs or cows or sheep or whatever, and bring them to market. And instead, now we have these monstrosities, that are corporate owned, that are answering to shareholders, that that are dictating and having a lot of control over what Americans eat, including what's injected into the foods, what types of medications they're given, the processing conditions, all of that. It's under the control of 1 or 2 really big corporations, and in many cases, we don't even know like in the US, we don't even know the provenance of our meats, the country of origin, and that's something that I've seen you talking about very passionately, and I wonder if you can address that, and it seems like that's a big piece of what needs to change, and you're talking about these conflicts of interest. To me, that's these are glaring conflicts of interest, that you have a corporation with shareholders that is controlling how your meat is slaughtered and grown and packed and distributed, and they're in control of the whole process. So how do we square that, and how does that get changed to bring about a healthier America? It's crazy.
Well, I think, we've used this sort of the guise of safety. It's like, well, we don't want individuals doing it this way because some of them have unsafe
Mhm.
practices. And while there is some truth to that, I think local markets sort of root that out. And you can certainly leave it to state and local. I mean, this is part of what America is. It's like, are we a republic? Are we a, strict federal? So you can say, hey, look, we can leave it to the states to regulate their own meat. It doesn't have to be this and that, or even we can leave it to local entities, counties or regions to do
Right.
this. And because we don't do that, and we say it's all got to go through the USDA if you want to, particularly if you want to engage in interstate transport. And then, but of course, the companies will use that, in the name of efficiency, because you can say, well, we can make it more efficient to grow food and thus more profitable,
Mhm.
and that's true. I mean, there's truth to that. I mean, there's economies of scale that certainly does work. So that argument becomes: is it more important to make profit over the food, or is it more important to provide nutritious food that will benefit people's health?
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think the previous is more important than the latter in
Yeah.
many cases. And it's
Yeah.
not that I don't want to say that I think our food supply is wholly like dangerous and killing everybody, depending on what we're talking. I think the ultra processed food, yes, but I think when we're talking about, can I go to the grocery store and get a package of ground beef and expect it to be still relatively healthful? I think that's still the case in many ways. I don't want to, because I just know too many people that consume their food that way and they do really well health wise. So I think there's some of that. I mean, when we talk about this is the one fear I have about Maha. I mean, because there are a lot of people out there that are like, it's got to all be regenerative agriculture. It's the only way, and we need to shut
Mhm.
down all the CAFOs and the feed yards. And I think if we did that in a very aggressive way, you would see an absolute decimation of the U.S. farming system. I mean, in many ways. So I think there has to be a very cautious, staggered, gradual approach to that if that's what we're going to do. I think that's something that we have to
Right.
realize.
Right.
I mean, it's just not something you can do overnight. So I think that's important to
Mhm.
realize.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think about I heard an interview that Joel Salatin did. He's known as the lunatic farmer, and he's written extensively and taught extensively about, regenerative farming, and that those types of things, and, he's actually not far from us. He's in our area, and, he has, his farm is Polyface Farms, and it's interesting to listen to him because, he explains this devolution of the local farming culture and economy that has been all but destroyed by big regulation and big business. And I think that, yes, I would like to see us go back to that, where you have more hyper local access to foods. And at the same time, I get that you can't just pull the rug out and make an overnight change. And I think one of the things that when it comes to somebody like RFK Jr., whenever you have somebody in a big position like that, there is a tendency to put kind of all one's eggs in that basket of thinking, "Okay, this person is gonna fix everything." I think that he is a starting point, and the reason that I think so many people are excited about him being in that position is because he's been aware of it, and he's been advocating for these changes for so long, and he's open, and he's curious, and I also think that he's not conflicted financially with incentives to continue furthering the system that we have seen that has actually brought harm to people. That's one of the things that I like about this changing of the guard, as it were, in this position at HHS. Speaking of food, it's time to take a quick break, not to eat, but to tell everybody about some things that we want to show you. But before we do that, Dr. Baker, you have partnered with a team that is bringing healthcare to the masses in a much more sensible way. Can we take a quick break and you share with us about what you're doing over at Rivero, and let people know how they can take part in that?
Yeah. So, and not only my partner, I'm a co-founder of the company. So Rivero.com, you see it on the screen there with the
Yeah.
QR code if you're interested. We're now in 48 of 50 states. We'll be in all 50 states by the end of March. Um, when I was practicing as an orthopedic surgeon and I started to wake up to the fact that, it's more than just the narrow scope of providing pills, procedures, and diagnosis, which I was taught. Health and to cure people, it really requires a holistic approach that involves nutrition and sleep and activity and stress management and light exposure and all the things that are so important. And I'm not an expert in those things. I mean, I wasn't trained to be, but I've had to learn that. And I think
Mhm.
if you're going to be a true health practitioner, a true doctor, a true healer, a true teacher, you need to develop an expertise in that area. And so we've hired and trained physicians in those areas. And the other thing is, it it requires a great deal of support. I mean, as a practicing orthopedic surgeon, even if I wanted to have somebody, change their lifestyle and make a lifestyle intervention, I had no resources. And so what Rivero does is provides all those resources, an entire team dedicated to each individual that will work with them on a daily basis to get them through the hard times, the issues, to teach them, to train them, to motivate them, to hold them accountable, and ultimately see them be successful. So this is a different way to do healthcare, compared to what the standard has been. And so if you are somebody with metabolic disease or diabetes or obesity or autoimmune disease, inflammatory diseases, that's what we focus on. And I think it's something that, ultimately will help, hopefully thousands, if not millions of people eventually.
Excellent, and we do have people scanning the QR code right now. If in case you're listening, and you can't see what's on the screen, the website is revero.com, Revero.com. You can go to that website and take a look at what Dr. Baker and his team over there are doing. It's pretty impressive. I also wanted to highlight today, our sponsor of our show. This is griddownchowdown.com. These are friends of ours who own or who are partnered with farmers and ranchers right here in the US to bring you premium freeze dried beef. This is ground beef. It's not jerky. It is beef that you can reconstitute with water. And when you do that, you can make any meal that you would normally make with ground beef. This is premium American grass fed, grass finished ground beef. And when you go to the link, griddownchowdown.com, and use the promo code Mary Grace, you're going to get a special deal. If you do the 24 serving subscription, you're going to get 4 servings for free when you use the promo code Mary Grace. And we're going to hear a word from these guys. You're going to see the actual rancher. When you do this, you're helping to support and save American farmland. So let's check it out, and we'll be right back. in about 40 seconds.
Hello, I'm Jordan, and this is my brother.
And I'm Nace, and we're the Grid Down Chowdown. And this is Larry, who is a local rancher that we've partnered with.
Now, Larry, you've been ranching for over 4 generations, is that correct?
That's correct. I'm 3rd generation, my son's 4th generation, and I've got some grandkids that are 5th generation.
Man, that's awesome.
We've been here for quite a while, yeah.
All right, now, Larry, your cattle is grass-fed, grass-finished, and pasture-raised, just like God intended them to be.
Yes, because I want to know what's in that animal,
Right.
What it's been fed. And so the only way to do that is for us to keep it all natural, just like God has done it for years and years and years, thousands of years. How has partnering up with us helped you and your ranch? Well, it's allowed us to develop a market that we didn't have before, one that can get directly to the consumer, and that's great.
And just remember, more importantly, with every package that you buy, we put a salvation track in there. So from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for allowing us to do what we believe that God has us here to do. And just remember, God loves you. He really does.
Amen.
Go to griddownchowdown.com. Okay, we are back. So that is griddownchowdown.com, premium grass-fed, grass-finished American freeze-dried beef. You can reconstitute this. They have different size packages too. So we're back with Dr. Shawn Baker. I am Mary Grace. We're having a nice little conversation here about wellness. There is one question for you, Dr. Baker, I think about Rivero, and that is, do you work with patients in Canada? That's a good question.
We unfortunately do not yet. That's
okay.
We got it. There's a lot of different regulations and laws we have to do to go to another country. So right now we're focusing on the U.S., but
okay,
maybe down the road.
Okay, I have a practitioner that I work with, Official Synapse. They do work with people in Canada, and they are focused on functional medicine. I'm going to put that link up here on the screen. Tell them that Mary Grace referred you, that you heard about them on today's show. And if you want to see more about what they offer, if you go to my channel, you will see a recent Q&A that I did with Dr. Troy Sproul from Synapse. And he does work in all 50 states and with Canada. And so if you're looking and you can't wait for Rivero, go ahead and reach out to them. That is Official Synapse, synapse.com. Really great organization. And we want to give people options. And so please go check it out. Thank you for that question. That was a good question. So let's get back to the conversation here. We've got a few more minutes. Dr. Baker has another show that he needs to jump onto here. He's busy and in demand, but we will come back and have continued conversations like this for you. And as always, if there is a topic that you want us to cover and we haven't gone there yet, please go to my website, marygracemedia.com, and you can go down to the bottom and send me an email through the website. It's info@marygracemedia.com. If there's something that you're curious about in this space and we haven't covered it. But before we sign off today, I have a question about this carnivore way of eating, and it comes up a lot for Dr. Baker, and that is supplements. A lot of people get really worried that when you start to limit your diet to one type of food, namely meat and fat, that you might not get enough nourishment and that you have to take some kind of green powders or different kinds of supplements. What has been your experience, and what is your thought on that? And just in the supplement space in general, seems like people make a lot of money on that.
Well, I mean, the supplement industry is projected to be a $300 billion industry coming up by 2028. It's not far from that right now. So there are a lot of supplements out there. The vast majority of them just don't work well. They don't work at all, and some of them are actually shown to be harmful. So I'm very skeptical on most things, and that's how I am about most things, to be honest. I'm show me the money type of thing. Show me the absolute. Yeah. And it's not that I felt a little different when I took this thing. I want to see long-term reversal of disease, long-term reversal of condition, not that I felt different for a few days or something like it, because that, because a lot of times, you can take anything and you can feel something, it's like, like a lot of these energy pills are just a bunch of caffeine, and yeah, you feel energized, and then you get addicted to it and you get tolerance to it and it won't lose its effect. So I'm highly critical and skeptical of most of them. I I have this sort of crazy belief that humans existed through most of our existence without supplement pills. I mean, I think that's fair to say. And I mean, yeah, granted, I mean, people would say, well, they didn't live forever and people died. But guess what? People have supplements and they've had supplements for the last 50 years and we're still dying and people are getting sick and we're sicker than we've ever been. So I don't
Yeah.
think the answer really necessarily is in the latest pill or shot or latest thing. Cause I mean, and these things come and go. And I know I hate to rain on anyone's parade, but I know these people are like, oh, but peptides are going to save me or methylene blue is going to save me or some, some people will say some mRNA vaccine is going to cure cancer. I mean, there's all these things. And I've been around for, I'm not that old. I'm almost 60, but I've been around to see a lot of things come and go and they all get hyped and it's the same story over and over again. And there's somebody that's really good at selling things and makes a compelling arguments. And yes, there'll be testimonials. But
Yeah.
then, you go, what happened? And 5 years later, no one's talking. Where did it go? Oh, well, it didn't really work that well. But I
Mhm.
mean, in that time, a bunch of wealth transferred hands and somebody made a lot of money and,
Yeah.
retired and, a bunch of people went on to the next thing. Because, if
That's
everybody gave I'll tell you that when I was a kid, I remember, I don't know why I did this. I remember I was in like 6th grade and me and my friend said, hey, we're going to just go walk around school and ask people for a nickel. Just ask them for a nickel. Hey,
How much did you make?
I was making like 10, $20 as like a sixth grader, all these kids would just give me a nickel, cause they had their lunch money. We'd all bring a little lunch money and
Yeah.
everybody had a little extra money. And I'd say, can I borrow a nickel from you? But that's what it is. You just nickel and dime people to death. They don't notice.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
only $50. It didn't matter. They didn't work. And so, I mean, that's
Yeah.
kind of what I think about that. Now,
Interesting.
it's not
Yeah.
to say that there aren't some
Mhm.
situations where supplementation might be of
Mhm.
acute, improvement. I mean, I think that does happen, but like I said, I would just be, particularly the new stuff. Show me the money, show me the outcome, show me the long-term data.
Mhm. Mhm.
And again, some people credit about carnivore because we don't have long-term studies on that stuff.
Right.
But the
Right.
outcomes are so significant. I mean, and it's not hard to see somebody going from 100 pounds overweight to normal weight, or from being bedbound to being
Mhm.
able to dance, or from being, morbidly,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
chronically sick to being completely normal. That that's not like a supplement where you're like, well, man, I don't know, maybe I felt a little jolt when I took it, but I mean, it's a very different
Right.
sort of,
Right. Yeah.
effect.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think, yes, in some cases it may be warranted, and I've had certain supplements that have helped me for a limited time, to get from point A to point B, but not as a lifetime thing. And, by the way, I think you're smarter than I am because I sold candy at school. I didn't think to just go ask people for money. I got narrators. There was one store that had them, and it wasn't near my school, so I would get my mom to take me there on the weekends, and I would buy the packs, and I would break the pack, and then I would sell each individual piece. I made quite a profit on that, and then I got shut down by the administration. I was in, like, 5th grade. I was brilliant. I mean, I came home with, like, pockets full of change.
There you go.
So but, I was like the original vitamin seller. So, uh we unfortunately we're running low on time here, and we have really good comments on all of the channels. Thank you everybody for watching today. We will start on time next time. We just had a little bit of a technical glitch today. We're aiming to do this every 2 weeks, right here on the Mary Grace show. And as I said, if you go to marygracemedia.com, that's the easiest way to keep up with when we're going to go live. I will send an email out before we do this. And then one more time, Dr. Baker, how can people follow you? How can they access the work that you're doing, and support this new health movement that we have going in America?
Yeah, like I said, if you're a U.S. citizen and you have chronic disease and you want help with that, Revero.com, Revero.com. I
Perfect.
am on social media at Twitter. I'm on, or X rather, S Baker MD. I'm on YouTube, Shawn Baker MD. I'm on Instagram, Shawn Baker 1967, Facebook, Shawn Baker MD, TikTok, Shawn Baker MD. That's where I'm
All
located
over,
currently.
and your
All over the
videos are
place. Yeah.
great. He has great videos. If you've never seen them, I definitely recommend. It's always informative and entertaining. So, thank you everybody for being here today. We will be back. Please be sure and follow all of our channels. I am at Mary Grace TV on X. I am at Mary Grace TV on Instagram, Mary Grace Media on Rumble, Facebook, and I think that's it. I'm not much of a TikToker, but we will be back. Thank you again, Dr. Baker. This is always, as always, a great conversation. And thank you to everybody in our chat. Please share, like, subscribe, follow, and tag others. We will be back soon with another episode of the Healing America and Beyond discussion. Take care, everybody.
All right. I got to run, Mary. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.